The scent of frying bacon hit Jacob Thornhill's nostrils before he even cleared the ridge, and his hand went instinctively to the rifle slung across his broad back. 20 years he had lived alone in these Colorado mountains, 20 years since he had walked away from civilization after watching his parents and younger sister succumb to cholera on the wagon train west in 1858. 20 years of solitude, broken only by the occasional trip down to the trading post in Silver Creek for supplies, and never once in all that time had anyone dared approach his cabin uninvited. The locals knew better. Mountain Man Jake, they called him, the giant with shoulders like an ox and hair that fell past his collar in dark waves, the man who could track a whisper through stone and bring down an elk at 300 yards. They told stories about him in the saloons, each tale growing taller with every telling, and that suited Jacob just fine. The legends kept people away, and away was exactly how he wanted them. But someone was cooking bacon on his porch in the autumn of 1878, and that someone was about to learn a very hard lesson about trespassing on Jacob Thornhill's land. He approached silently through the pines, his moccasins making no sound on the carpet of fallen needles. The cabin came into view through the trees, and there on the covered porch stood a woman. Not a ghost, not a hallucination brought on by too much solitude, but a real flesh-and-blood woman with copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid and a dress that had seen better days. She was humming something while she worked at his makeshift outdoor stove, completely at ease, as if she cooked breakfast on strange men's porches every day of her life. Jacob's finger moved to the trigger, not to shoot, but to make his presence known with a warning shot when the woman turned slightly and he caught sight of her face. She was young, maybe 25 at most, with a determined set to her jaw that spoke of someone who had faced down hardship and refused to break. There was a purple bruise fading on her left cheekbone and what looked like healing scratches on her forearms. "I know you were out there," she called without turning around fully, her voice steady despite the slight tremor he detected underneath. "I can hear you breathing. And I mean no harm. I just needed a safe place for the night, and this cabin looked abandoned." "Abandoned," Jacob said, stepping out from the tree line, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke aloud anymore, having no one to talk to but himself and occasionally his horse. "You thought a cabin with a stocked woodpile, clean windows, and a swept porch was abandoned?" She turned then, and her eyes went wide at the sight of him. He knew what he looked like, 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle wrapped in buckskin and fur, with a face that had forgotten how to smile and eyes that had seen too much loss. His beard was neatly trimmed, not wild like some hermits, because even in solitude he maintained his father's standards, but combined with his size and the rifle in his hands, he cut an intimidating figure. "I hoped it was," she said, and he had to admire her courage because her voice barely shook. "But I was desperate enough that abandoned or occupied did not matter much. Desperate." He moved closer, keeping the rifle pointed down but ready. "That explains the bruises, but not the trespassing. I am sorry." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. "Truly I am. I can leave right now if you want, but I made enough bacon for 2, and these eggs will go to waste if someone does not eat them. It seemed the least I could do since I used your supplies." Jacob stared at her. This strange woman who had invaded his sanctuary and was now offering him breakfast, as if that made everything acceptable. He should send her on her way immediately. He should make it clear that his solitude was not negotiable, and his mountain was not a refuge for wayward travelers. But he had not had a conversation with another human being in 4 months, and despite his determination to remain alone, some small part of him that he thought had died long ago stirred with curiosity. "Where did you come from?" he asked instead of ordering her off his land. "Silver Creek 3 days ago." She turned back to the bacon, flipping it expertly. "Before that, a lot of places. I've been moving west for the better part of 6 months. Running from someone. Running from a husband who thought his fists were an acceptable form of communication." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, and Jacob felt something dark twist in his chest. "I stayed longer than I should have, kept thinking he would change, but after he broke my arm last winter, I realized change was not coming." She said it so calmly, as if discussing the weather, but Jacob saw the way her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the bacon from the pan. He had been alone for 2 decades, removed from the world and its cruelties, but he still remembered his father's teachings. A man who raised his hand to a woman was no man at all. He followed you. It was not a question. I thought I had lost him in Denver, but I saw him in Silver Creek 2 days ago. She plated the bacon and eggs with practiced efficiency. I panicked and ran into the mountains. I've been walking ever since. And when I found your cabin last night, I was too tired to care about anything except getting inside 4 walls. The door was unlocked. It is always unlocked. Jacob propped his rifle against the porch post and accepted the plate she offered him. No one is fool enough to rob me, and animals cannot turn door handles. Lucky for me, then. She gave him a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I am Eleanor, by the way. Eleanor Briggs. Well, Eleanor Sutton now, though I plan to go back to Briggs as soon as I figure out how. Divorce is not easy. Jacob sat on the porch steps, and after a moment's hesitation, Eleanor sat beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. Especially not for women. Courts do not look kindly on wives who leave. I know, she pushed eggs around her plate without eating, but I would rather be a scandalous divorcee than a dead wife, so I will take my chances. They ate in silence for a while, and Jacob found himself studying her from the corner of his eye. She had a practical air about her, the kind of woman who knew how to work and was not afraid of hardship. Her hands were calloused, her nails short and clean, and she ate with the focused intensity of someone who had gone hungry before and did not take food for granted. "What is your name?" Eleanor asked finally, breaking the silence. "Jacob Thornhill. Most people call me Jake." "Thank you for not shooting me, Jake." There was a hint of humor in her voice now, some of the fear fading as she realized he was not going to hurt her. "I half expected to wake up with a rifle in my face." "Day is still young," he said, but there was no heat in it, and Eleanor laughed, a sound so unexpected and bright that it startled the jay perched in the nearby pine. "Fair enough." She set her empty plate aside and wrapped her arms around her knees. "I will leave as soon as I finish eating. I'm sorry for intruding on your solitude. I can tell you value it." Jacob should agree. He should thank her for breakfast, point her toward the safest path down the mountain, and watch her walk out of his life as suddenly as she had entered it. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing, the thing that would preserve the careful isolation he had built like a fortress around his heart. Instead, he heard himself say, "This husband of yours, what does he look like?" Eleanor's head snapped toward him, surprise written across her features. "Why?" "Because if he is in Silver Creek asking about a copper-haired woman, someone might have pointed him toward the mountain trails. These peaks are not kind to inexperienced travelers, but a determined man might try anyway." Jacob stood and picked up both plates. "And because I am curious whether I need to shoot him when he shows up, or just scare him back down the mountain." "You would do that?" Eleanor rose as well, her eyes searching his face. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." Jacob moved toward the cabin door. "I know you are running from someone who hurt you, and I know you had the courage to cook breakfast for a stranger who could have killed you. That tells me you are either very brave or very desperate, and either way, you deserve better than being hunted like an animal." "I am both," Eleanor said softly. "Brave and desperate, though mostly desperate if I'm being honest." Jacob pushed open the cabin door, and Eleanor followed him inside, her eyes widening as she took in the space. It was larger than it looked from outside, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a hand-pump sink he had installed himself, a table with 2 chairs, and a sleeping loft accessible by a sturdy ladder. Everything was neat and well-maintained, the floor swept, the furs on the furniture clean and brushed, the shelves lined with preserved food and supplies. "This is beautiful," Eleanor breathed, running her hand along the smooth wooden table. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it." Jacob set the plates in the sink basin. "The original cabin was here when I arrived, but it was barely standing. I've been improving it for 20 years. 20 years? Eleanor turned to look at him. "You've been alone up here for 20 years? Give or take." He did not elaborate, did not explain about the cholera or the graves he had dug with his father before the fever took him too, leaving Jacob the sole survivor of a family that had dreamed of California gold. "It suits me. I can see why." She moved to the window, looking out at the view of pine-covered slopes and distant peaks. "It is peaceful here, quiet, like the rest of the world does not exist." "That is the idea." Eleanor turned back to him, and something in her expression had shifted, become more thoughtful. "Would you let me stay? Just for a few days, until I am sure Raymond has given up and gone back to wherever he came from. I can work for my keep. I'm a good cook. I can clean, mend, hunt if you have an extra rifle. I will not be a burden, I promise." Every instinct Jacob had cultivated over 2 decades of solitude screamed at him to refuse. He did not need help. He did not want company. His life was ordered and predictable, and Eleanor represented chaos, complication, a crack in the armor he had built around his heart. But when he opened his mouth to say no, what came out was, 3 days. You can stay 3 days, and then you need to move on. There is a settlement 2 days west of here, past the big pass. They do not ask questions, and they will not tell anyone you are there. Relief flooded Eleanor's face, so profound and genuine that Jacob felt something twist in his chest again. "Thank you. You will not regret this, I swear." "I already regret it," Jacob muttered, but he was lying, and some part of him knew it. The first day passed in careful politeness, each of them orbiting the other like planets trying not to collide. Jacob went about his normal routine, checking his trap lines and hunting for fresh meat, while Eleanor stayed at the cabin and made herself useful. When he returned in late afternoon with 2 rabbits and a grouse, he found the cabin transformed. Every surface gleamed, the furs had been beaten and brushed until they looked new, and something delicious bubbled in the pot over the fire. "I found vegetables in your root cellar," Eleanor explained, stirring the stew. "I hope you do not mind. I made bread too, though the oven is tricky. I had to guess at the temperature." Jacob skinned and cleaned his kills outside while the light lasted, then brought the meat in to add to the stew. They ate dinner at the table, and the silence was more comfortable this time, broken by small observations about the weather and the game. "You are a good hunter," Eleanor said, tearing off a piece of bread. "These rabbits are perfectly dressed." "Practice." Jacob ladled more stew into his bowl. "You are a good cook, better than me. My mother ran a boarding house in St. Louis before she died. I grew up cooking for crowds." Eleanor's expression went distant. "I met Raymond at the boarding house. He seemed charming at first, attentive. By the time I realized what he really was, we were already married, and it was too late." "It is never too late to leave." Jacob met her eyes across the table. "You proved that." "I suppose I did," she smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Took me long enough, though. 5 years of hoping and praying he would change before I finally accepted the truth. 5 years is a long time to suffer." "Yes, but I am free now. Or I will be, once I am sure he has given up looking." Eleanor set down her spoon. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question. Why did you leave civilization? 20 years is a long time to be alone. Most people would go mad." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share. He had not spoken about his past to anyone, had buried it along with his family in shallow graves somewhere on the Kansas plains. But Eleanor had been honest with him, had shared her pain without hesitation, and that honesty deserved something in return. "Cholera," he said finally. 1858. We were on a wagon train heading to California, my parents, my little sister, and me. The sickness swept through like wildfire. Within 2 weeks, half the train was dead, including my family. I buried my sister first, then my mother, then my father. I was 19 years old, and suddenly alone in the world. Eleanor's hand reached across the table, covering his before he could pull away. Her palm was warm, her touch gentle. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I could not go back east. Everything I knew was gone, and I could not go forward to California because that had been their dream, not mine. So I just walked away from the trail and kept walking until I found this mountain." He did not pull his hand away from hers, and that surprised him. "I told myself I would stay 1 winter, just to clear my head, but winter turned into spring and spring into summer, and I never left. 20 years. Eleanor's thumb traced small circles on the back of his hand. "That's a long time to grieve." "I'm not grieving anymore," Jacob said, but even as he spoke, he knew it was not entirely true. "I'm just living. Living alone." Eleanor's eyes searched his face. "But are you happy?" No one had asked him that in 2 decades. No one had cared enough to wonder whether the mountain man in his fortress of solitude was content with his choices. Jacob pulled his hand back gently and stood, carrying his bowl to the sink. "Happiness is overrated," he said. which was not an answer at all, and they both knew it. That night, Jacob insisted Eleanor take the loft while he made a bedroll by the fire. She protested, but he would not hear otherwise, and eventually she climbed the ladder, too tired to argue further. Jacob lay awake for a long time, staring at the dying embers and listening to the soft sound of Eleanor's breathing from above. The cabin felt different with another person in it, smaller somehow, but also warmer, more alive. He told himself it was temporary, that in 3 days she would be gone and everything would return to normal, but the thought brought less comfort than it should have. The second day dawned clear and cold, frost sparkling on the grass outside. Jacob woke to find Eleanor already up, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. She moved around his kitchen with easy confidence, as if she'd been doing it for years instead of a single day, and Jacob felt that dangerous crack in his armor widen a little further. "I thought I would check the area today," he said over coffee and fried cornmeal cakes. "Make sure your husband has not picked up your trail." "You do not have to do that," but Eleanor's relief was evident. "I do not want to put you in danger. I have been tracking game in these mountains for 20 years. A city man like your Raymond will not even see me coming." Jacob finished his coffee and stood. "Stay inside while I am gone. If anyone comes to the door, anyone at all, you hide in the loft and keep quiet." "Jake." Eleanor rose as well, moving to stand before him. She barely came up to his chest, small and fine-boned compared to his bulk, but there was nothing weak about the way she looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" "The truth this time." Jacob could have deflected, could have made some excuse about common decency or Christian charity. Instead, he found himself being honest in a way he had not been with anyone in years. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone and afraid," he said quietly. "And because when I look at you, I see someone fighting to survive just like I did. Maybe I am helping you because I wish someone had helped me." Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away. "Thank you. For your honesty and for everything else." Jacob nodded, not trusting himself to speak further, and headed out into the cold morning. He spent the day ranging wide around his territory, checking for signs of intruders. He found tracks near the eastern approach, fresh boot prints that did not belong to him or to Eleanor's worn traveling shoes. Someone had been scouting the area, and recently. He followed the trail carefully, noting the way the person moved without caution, crashing through undergrowth and leaving broken branches in their wake. A city man, just as he had suspected, someone unused to wilderness travel. The tracks led up toward his cabin before veering off toward the south, as if the person had spotted something and changed direction. Jacob spent an hour obscuring the trail that led directly to his cabin, laying false paths and covering Eleanor's tracks from her desperate flight up the mountain. If Raymond was out here, he would find only confusion and dead ends. Satisfied with his work, Jacob shot a deer on his way back, field-dressed it, and carried it home over his shoulders. Eleanor met him at the door, her face anxious. "I was starting to worry." "No need." Jacob hung the deer carcass from the hooks on his porch. "But we have a problem. Someone has been in the area, and based on the tracks, I would wager it is your Raymond." The color drained from Eleanor's face. "He is here? On the mountain?" "He was, but he moved south, away from the cabin. I covered your trail and laid some false ones. He will not find you easily." Jacob washed his hands in the basin Eleanor had prepared. "But he is looking, which means you cannot leave yet, not until I am sure he has given up and headed back down." "How long will that take?" "Depends on how determined he is." Jacob dried his hands and turned to face her. "Could be days, could be longer." "I cannot ask you to shelter me for that long." Eleanor paced the cabin, her agitation clear. "This is your home, your sanctuary. I have already imposed far too much. You did not ask. I am offering." Jacob moved to block her pacing, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "Eleanor, listen to me. If you leave now and he catches you out in the open, what do you think happens?" She closed her eyes, swaying slightly. "Nothing good. Nothing good," Jacob agreed. "So you stay here where it is safe and let me handle this. I'm not afraid of your husband." "You should be." Eleanor's eyes opened, dark with fear. "Raymond is not a good man, Jake. He has connections, money, and he does not forgive people who cross him. If he finds out you are helping me..." Then he will learn a very painful lesson about mountain justice. Jacob's voice was hard. I meant what I said, Eleanor. You are under my protection now, and I do not take that lightly. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, the fear giving way to something else, something warmer and more complicated. Why are you really doing this? And do not give me that line about helping because you wish someone had helped you. There is more to it than that. Jacob let his hands fall from her shoulders, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. You want honesty? Always. Because for the first time in 20 years, I do not feel alone. The words came out rough, unpolished, but true. Because you walked into my life and reminded me that there is more to living than just surviving. And because when I look at you, I see something I thought I had lost forever. What is that? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Hope. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Eleanor reached up, her hand cupping Jacob's bearded jaw, her thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone. I see the same thing when I look at you, she said softly. Someone who survived something terrible and kept going. Someone strong and kind and brave. Someone I would very much like to get to know better. Jacob's heart, that organ he had thought long dead, kicked hard against his ribs. Eleanor, I know this is complicated. I know I am still technically married, and you have spent 20 years choosing solitude. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. Her eyes searched his, but I cannot be the only one feeling this. She was not. Jacob had felt it from the moment he saw her standing on his porch, had felt the pull growing stronger with every conversation, every shared meal, every small smile she offered him. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what connection felt like, had convinced himself he did not need or want it. But Eleanor had shattered that illusion as easily as sunlight breaking through clouds. You are not, he admitted, his hand coming up to cover hers where it rested against his face. But I do not know how to do this, Eleanor. I do not know how to be with someone anymore. Neither do I, she said. Not in any healthy way. Raymond made sure of that. But maybe we can figure it out together, slowly, carefully, with no expectations or pressure. Jacob should say no. He should maintain his distance, keep things professional until Raymond was dealt with and Eleanor moved on to her new life. That was the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that would protect them both from inevitable heartbreak. Instead, he bent his head and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, the kiss of a man who had forgotten how and a woman who had only known violence where affection should have been. Their lips touched softly, questioningly, and Eleanor made a small sound that was part surprise and part relief. Her free hand fisted in the buckskin of his shirt, pulling him closer, and Jacob wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her weight as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor rested her forehead against his chest. That was my first real kiss, she whispered. Raymond never kissed me like that, like I mattered, like I was precious. Jacob's arms tightened around her. You are precious, and anyone who could not see that is a fool. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the fire crackling softly behind them. Finally, Eleanor pulled back, her eyes bright. I should start dinner. That deer will not butcher itself. I will handle the deer. You rest. Jacob brushed a strand of copper hair from her face. You have been running for days. You need to recover your strength. I have been running for months, Eleanor corrected, but she did not argue further. But yes, I am tired, so very tired. Jacob guided her to the chair by the fire and draped a fur over her lap. Sleep if you want. I will wake you when food is ready. Eleanor caught his hand as he turned away. Jake, thank you. For everything. You already thanked me. I know, but I wanted to say it again. She squeezed his fingers. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever too. What is that? Safety. Jacob carried that word with him as he went back outside to process the deer. Safety. Such a simple thing, and yet Eleanor had been denied it for 5 long years. He worked methodically, his hands steady on the knife, his mind turning over everything that had happened in the past 2 days. His carefully ordered life had been turned upside down by a copper-haired woman with a bruised face and a fierce will to survive. And instead of resenting the intrusion, he found himself grateful for it. 20 years of solitude had not healed his grief. It had only frozen it, suspended him in a state of not quite living. Eleanor's arrival had thawed something in him, had reminded him that life was more than just getting through each day. It was connection and conversation, shared meals and soft touches, the terrifying and exhilarating possibility of caring for someone again. When he came back inside with the venison, Eleanor was asleep in the chair, her head pillowed on her arms, her breathing deep and even. Jacob moved quietly, not wanting to wake her, and set about preparing dinner. He was no great cook, but he could manage a decent stew, and the work gave his hands something to do while his mind processed the kiss they had shared. He had kissed her. After 2 decades of touching no one, of allowing no one close, he had bent down and pressed his lips to Eleanor's, as naturally as breathing. And she had kissed him back, had welcomed it, had said it was her first real kiss despite 5 years of marriage. The thought of what Raymond had done to her, how he had treated something precious and beautiful like an object to be used and broken, made Jacob's blood run hot with anger. "Smells good." Eleanor's sleepy voice broke into his thoughts. She stretched like a cat, wincing slightly. "I did not mean to fall asleep." "You needed it." Jacob stirred the pot. "Dinner will be ready soon." Eleanor rose and moved to the sink, splashing water on her face. "I feel like I could sleep for a week. I've been running on fear and stubbornness for so long that now that I feel safe, my body wants to shut down." "Then sleep. Stay as long as you need. I meant what I said about protection. And I meant what I said about working for my keep." Eleanor came to stand beside him at the stove. "I am not a freeloader, Jake. Let me earn my place here." "You already have." He ladled stew into bowls. "But if it makes you feel better, you can keep cooking. You are much better at it than I am." They ate dinner in comfortable silence, the kiss hanging between them like a promise neither was quite ready to define. Afterward, Eleanor insisted on cleaning up while Jacob attended to evening chores, checking the perimeter and securing the cabin for the night. When he came back inside, she had changed into a clean shirt of his that she must have found in the loft, the fabric hanging nearly to her knees. "I hope you do not mind," she said, plucking at the oversized garment. "My dress needs washing, and this was the smallest thing I could find." "Keep it." Jacob's voice came out rougher than he intended. Eleanor in his shirt, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her feet bare on his clean floor, was doing dangerous things to his composure. "It looks better on you anyway." Flatterer, but she was smiling as she climbed the ladder to the loft. "Good night, Jake." "Good night, Eleanor." Jacob made his bedroll by the fire again, but sleep was a long time coming. He lay awake listening to the sounds of the cabin, the crackle of burning wood and the whisper of wind through the pines, and the soft breathing from the loft that told him Eleanor was finally, truly resting. His hand went to his lips, remembering the softness of hers, the way she had melted into him as if she had been waiting her whole life for a gentle touch. 3 days, he had told her. She could stay 3 days. But already he knew 3 days would not be enough. 3 lifetimes would not be enough to explore everything he felt stirring in his chest, this tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, he did not have to be alone anymore. The 3rd day brought rain, a cold, steady downpour that turned the world gray and made the cabin feel even more like a sanctuary. Jacob woke to find Eleanor already up, standing at the window and watching the rain with a thoughtful expression. "I love the rain," she said without turning around. "Raymond hated it, said it made him feel trapped, but I always found it peaceful." Jacob joined her at the window, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "It will make tracking harder. If your husband is still out there looking, he will have to take shelter until it passes. How long do you think it will last?" "Day or 2, maybe more. Mountain weather is unpredictable." He glanced at her profile. "That means you are stuck with me a little longer." "I can think of worse fates." Eleanor turned to smile at him, and the morning light caught in her hair, turning it the color of new pennies. "What do mountain men do on rainy days?" "Maintenance mostly. Repair tools, oil leather, that sort of thing." Jacob moved away from the window before he did something foolish like kiss her again. "Not very exciting." "Can you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "Whatever you would normally be doing. I want to learn. If I'm going to start a new life out here in the territories, I need to know how to take care of myself." Eleanor's expression was earnest. "I do not want to be helpless ever again." So Jacob taught her, He showed her how to oil the hinges on the door, how to sharpen a knife properly, how to check traps for weak points and repair them. Eleanor was an eager student, her hands quick and capable, her questions intelligent. She had clearly been observing him over the past few days, noting how he did things, and now she soaked up knowledge like parched earth accepting rain. "You are a good teacher," she said as they worked side by side at the table, repairing a trap that had been damaged by a bear. "Patient. You are a good learner." Jacob watched her fingers work the wire with growing confidence. "You have steady hands." "My mother always said I should have been a surgeon." Eleanor's expression went distant. "But women cannot be surgeons, so I learned to cook instead. Though I suppose cooking and surgery are not so different. Both require precision and a strong stomach." "What would you do?" Jacob asked. "If you could do anything, be anything, what would you choose?" Eleanor set down her tools and considered the question seriously. "I think I would want to run a business. A restaurant maybe, or a hotel. Something that was mine, that I built from nothing. Somewhere people could come and feel welcome and safe." She looked at him. What about you? If you had not chosen this life, what would you have done?" "I did not choose this life," Jacob said. "It chose me. But if things had been different, if my family had lived, I think I would have wanted to be a rancher, raise cattle and horses, build something lasting." "You still could." "No." Jacob shook his head. "That dream died with my family." "Dreams do not die, Jake. They just change shape." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "You built something lasting here. This cabin, this life. It is not a ranch, but it is yours. And it is beautiful. It is lonely. It does not have to be." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Jacob turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through Eleanor's, marveling at how right it felt. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my 3 days are up, and I do not want to leave." Eleanor's voice was steady, sure. "I'm saying that I feel safer and happier here with you than I have felt anywhere in my entire life. I am saying that I know this is fast and complicated and probably crazy, but I would like to stay, if you will have me." Jacob's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Eleanor, you barely know me. I know you are kind and honorable. I know you could have taken advantage of me a dozen times over the past 3 days, but you have been nothing but respectful. I know you have been hurt, and you are afraid of being hurt again. I know you kiss like a man who has been starving for affection and did not even realize it." She squeezed his hand. "And I know that when I imagine my future, the only place I want to be is right here. What about your husband? He will not stop looking. Then we deal with him together." Eleanor's jaw set with determination. "I am done running, Jake. I am done letting Raymond dictate my life. If he comes here, we face him. But I am not leaving." Jacob stared at her, this fierce woman who had stumbled into his life and turned everything upside down. Every logical part of him said this was a mistake, that he should send her away before they both got hurt, before he got used to having her here and lost her, like he had lost everyone else he had ever loved. But the part of him that had been frozen for 20 years, the part that Eleanor had thawed with her presence and her honesty and her gentle touch, that part was screaming at him to take the chance. "I do not know how to do this," he said again, the same words he had spoken before kissing her. "I have been alone for so long." "So have I. Even when I was married, I was alone. Raymond never saw me, never really knew me. He just saw something he could own and control." Eleanor rose and came around the table, standing before him. "But you see me, Jake. You see me, and you treat me like a person, like someone who matters. Do you know how rare that is?" Jacob stood as well, his hands settling on her waist. "You do matter, more than you know. Then let me stay. We will figure out the rest as we go." He should think about it more, should consider all the complications and potential disasters. But looking down into Eleanor's upturned face, seeing the hope and determination there, he found he could not say no, did not want to say no. "Yes," he said simply, "stay." Eleanor's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. She stretched up on her toes and kissed him, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Jacob pulled her close, lifting her off her feet, and she wrapped her arms around his neck with a small laugh of pure joy. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor rested her head against his chest. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again. Happy, hopeful, safe. Thank you for giving me that." "Thank you for reminding me I'm still alive." Jacob pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I forgot somewhere along the way." They spent the rest of the rainy day in companionable closeness, working on small tasks and talking about everything and nothing. Eleanor told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her mother's boarding house and the parade of colorful characters who had stayed there. Jacob told her about his childhood in Ohio, about his father's blacksmith shop and his mother's garden, about his sister who had loved to sing and had planned to be an opera singer someday. "She would have been 27 now," he said, staring into the fire as evening fell. "Just a little older than you. I wonder what she would have been like. I bet she would have been fierce and brave, just like her brother." Eleanor was curled beside him on the fur-draped bench, her head on his shoulder. "I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you." Jacob's arm tightened around Eleanor. "She always said I needed someone to keep me humble." "Then I will take that as my sacred duty." Eleanor's tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious. "No more 20 years alone, Jake. No more hiding from life. We are going to live, truly live, starting now." "Starting now," Jacob agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. That night, Eleanor did not climb to the loft. She curled up beside Jacob in his bedroll by the fire, tucked against his chest with his arm wrapped protectively around her. They did not do more than hold each other, both understanding that some things required time and patience, but the intimacy of sleeping in each other's arms was profound in its own way. Jacob lay awake long after Eleanor had drifted off, listening to her breathe, feeling the warmth of her body against his. 20 years he had spent alone, convinced he did not need anyone, convinced that isolation was safer than the risk of loss. But Eleanor had shown him the flaw in that logic. Yes, loving someone meant risking pain, but it also meant experiencing joy, connection, the simple, profound pleasure of another human being's presence. He had survived alone, but with Eleanor, he could truly live. The rain continued through the next day and into the one after that, turning the world into a watercolor painting of grays and greens. Jacob and Eleanor settled into an easy routine, working together on cabin tasks, cooking meals side by side, talking for hours about everything and nothing. They were learning each other, discovering preferences and quirks and the small details that made up a person's character. Jacob learned that Eleanor hummed when she was content, that she took her coffee with honey instead of sugar, that she had a fear of spiders but could gut a fish without flinching. Eleanor learned that Jake was surprisingly well-read, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was gentle with small creatures and plants despite his size and strength. "You are not what I expected," Eleanor said one evening as they sat by the fire, her feet in his lap while he absently rubbed them. "When I first saw you coming out of the trees with that rifle, I thought you were going to be angry and rough. But you are one of the gentlest men I have ever met." "Gentle does not mean weak," Jacob said. "My father taught me that. He said true strength is knowing when to be hard and when to be soft, and having the wisdom to choose correctly." "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was. He would have liked you too." Jacob's hands stilled on her feet. "Sometimes I wonder what he would think of the life I chose, whether he would be disappointed that I gave up and hid instead of pushing forward." "You did not give up," Eleanor said firmly. "You survived, Jake. Sometimes survival looks like pushing forward, and sometimes it looks like finding a safe place to heal. There's no shame in that. I do not know if I have been healing or just hiding. Maybe both. Maybe that is okay." Eleanor pulled her feet from his lap and shifted closer, taking his face in her hands. "But you are not hiding anymore. You are here with me, letting yourself feel things again. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." Jacob closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I am scared," he admitted. "Scared of losing you like I lost them. Scared that this happiness is temporary and will be ripped away." "I am scared too," Eleanor whispered. "Scared that Raymond will find me, that he will hurt you because of me. Scared that I do not know how to be in a healthy relationship because all I know is pain and fear. Scared that I will wake up and this will all have been a dream. So we are both terrified. Jacob opened his eyes, meeting hers. What do we do about that? We choose to be brave anyway. We choose each other, fear and all, and we figure it out together. Eleanor kissed him softly. One day at a time, one moment at a time. We do not have to have all the answers right now. One day at a time, Jacob repeated. I think I can do that. They held each other as the fire burned down to embers, the rain drumming steadily on the roof. And for the first time in 20 years, Jacob felt something he had thought lost forever. He felt home. The rain finally broke on the 5th day, and Jacob knew he needed to check the area again to make sure Raymond had not circled back during the storm. He told Eleanor his plans over breakfast, and she nodded, her face pale but determined. Be careful, she said, gripping his hand. Please. Always. Jacob kissed her forehead. Stay inside. Bar the door after me. If I am not back by nightfall, there's a rifle over the mantel and ammunition in the tin by the fireplace. You remember how to load it? Yes. Eleanor had insisted he teach her to shoot, and she had proven a surprisingly good student. But you will be back by nightfall. I will be back by nightfall, Jacob promised, though they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The mountains were transformed by the rain, streams running high and the ground soft underfoot. Jacob moved carefully, all his senses alert, following the cold trails he had found days earlier. The rain had washed away most of the tracks, but he knew how to read the land, how to spot the signs others missed. He found Raymond's camp around midday, tucked into a rocky overhang on the southern slope. The man had clearly been there for several days, waiting out the storm, and he had not been careful about covering his presence. The remains of a fire still smoldered, and supplies were scattered carelessly around the shelter. Jacob studied the scene from concealment, taking in every detail. Raymond himself was nowhere to be seen, but his bedroll was still there, along with his saddlebags and a rifle. The horse was picketed nearby, a decent-looking bay that looked half-starved and poorly tended. Raymond was out scouting then, probably trying to pick up Eleanor's trail again now that the weather had cleared. Moving silently, Jacob approached the camp and quickly went through the saddlebags. He found a photograph, a tintype of Eleanor on her wedding day, looking young and hopeful and nothing like the determined woman currently staying in his cabin. There were also papers, legal documents declaring Eleanor the property of Raymond Sutton, and a bundle of correspondence from a lawyer in Denver discussing strategies for forcing an escaped wife to return home. Rage, cold and focused, settled in Jacob's chest. Raymond was not just looking for Eleanor out of wounded pride or love. He saw her as property, as something he owned that had been stolen from him. The papers made it clear he planned to use the law to force her back into his control, and if the law failed, there were hints of more permanent solutions. Jacob pocketed the photograph and the legal papers, then made a decision. He cut the picket rope and slapped the horse on the rump, sending it galloping off down the mountain. Then he scattered Raymond's supplies, dumping his food stores into the mud and breaking his spare rifle across a rock. He left the bedroll in the fire, evidence that someone had been there, but took everything else of value. When Raymond returned to camp, he would find himself stranded in the mountains with no horse, no supplies, and no way to continue his hunt. He would have no choice but to walk back down to Silver Creek and give up his search. It was not a permanent solution, but it would buy them time. Jacob was a mile from Raymond's camp when he heard the shout behind him. He turned to see a man crashing through the underbrush, red-faced and furious, waving a pistol. "You! Stop right there!" Jacob did not stop. He broke into a run, using his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. He heard the crack of gunfire, felt the bullet whip past his head, but he did not slow. He led Raymond on a twisting chase through the pines, always staying just ahead, letting the other man exhaust himself. Finally, after an hour of pursuit, Jacob doubled back and came up behind Raymond as the man paused to catch his breath. He moved fast, one arm locking around Raymond's throat while his other hand disarmed him. "You are done," Jacob growled in Raymond's ear. "You are done hunting her, done terrorizing her, done thinking you have any right to her life." Raymond struggled, but he was no match for Jacob's strength. "She is my wife. She belongs to me." "She belongs to no one but herself." Jacob tightened his grip just enough to make breathing difficult. "You're going to walk down this mountain, get on the first stage out of Silver Creek, and never come back. If I ever see you in these mountains again, I will not be this merciful." "Merciful? You destroyed my camp, stole my horse." "I saved your life," Jacob interrupted, "because if you had found her, if you had laid one finger on her, I would have buried you so deep in these mountains that no one would ever find your bones. Now move." He released Raymond with a shove, sending the man stumbling forward. Raymond spun around, his face purple with rage. "This is not over. I will have the law on you. I will see you hanged for kidnapping and theft." "Try it." Jacob's voice was flat, cold. "You have no proof of anything, no witnesses, no evidence, just the word of a wife-beating coward against a man who has lived in these mountains for 20 years. Who do you think the territorial marshal will believe?" Raymond's mouth worked, but no sound came out. He looked at Jacob, really looked at him for the first time, taking in the size and the strength and the absolute conviction in his eyes. Whatever he saw there made him step back. "Fine," Raymond spat. "Keep the faithless whore. See how long she stays before she runs from you too." Jacob moved before he could think, one fist connecting with Raymond's jaw and sending the man sprawling. "You do not talk about her. You do not think about her. As of this moment, Eleanor is dead to you. Do you understand?" Raymond wiped blood from his split lip, hatred burning in his eyes, but he nodded. "Understood. Good. Now walk." Jacob followed Raymond for the next 3 hours, making sure the man did not try to circle back toward the cabin. When they finally reached the outskirts of Silver Creek, Jacob stopped and watched as Raymond stumbled into town, beaten and humiliated. Only then did he turn and head back up the mountain. It was full dark by the time Jacob reached the cabin, and he could see warm light glowing through the windows. He called out as he approached, not wanting to startle Eleanor, and the door flew open before he reached the porch. "Jake!" Eleanor launched herself at him, and he caught her easily, lifting her off her feet. "I was so worried. It has been hours past nightfall." "I'm sorry. It took longer than expected." Jacob set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. "But it is done. Raymond is gone. He will not bother you again." "You're sure?" Eleanor searched his face, her hands gripping his shirt. "You're absolutely sure?" "I'm sure." Jacob pulled the photograph and papers from his pocket. "These are yours now. Do with them what you want." Eleanor took the items with shaking hands, staring at her own young face in the tintype. Then, deliberately, she walked to the fire and threw them in, watching as the flames consumed her past. "I want to tell you something," she said, turning back to face him. "My full name is Eleanor Rose Briggs. I was born March 15th, 1853, in St. Louis, Missouri. My mother was Catherine Briggs, and my father was Thomas Briggs. They were good people who loved me very much. I'm 25 years old, and I have been married to Raymond Sutton for 5 years. But that marriage is over. From this moment forward, I am Eleanor Briggs again, and I choose my own future." "And what future do you choose?" Jacob asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "I choose you." Eleanor crossed the room to stand before him. "If you will have me. Not as a charity case or someone you feel obligated to protect, but as a partner, as someone you might come to love, given time. Eleanor." Jacob pulled her close, resting his chin on the top of her head. "I already love you. I think I have loved you since you offered me breakfast on my own porch like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was less than a week ago." But Eleanor was smiling against his chest. "I know. Fast, right?" Jacob tilted her face up. "But I have spent 20 years alone, and in 1 week with you, I have felt more alive than I did in all those years combined. So yes, I love you, Eleanor Rose Briggs, and I want you to stay, not for 3 days or 3 weeks, but for as long as you will have me." "How about forever?" Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears. "Would forever work for you?" "Forever works just fine." They kissed then, long and deep and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Jacob swept Eleanor into his arms and carried her to the loft. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had given to learning each other's minds and hearts. For Eleanor, it was the first time experiencing intimacy without fear or pain, and tears slipped down her cheeks even as she smiled. "I have got you," Jacob whispered, kissing away her tears. "I have got you, and I will never hurt you. Never." "I know," Eleanor breathed, pulling him closer. "I trust you completely." Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow loft bed, Eleanor's head on Jacob's chest and his arm wrapped around her. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked softly. "How do we make this work? I'm still legally married, and even if I could get a divorce, it would take months, maybe years." "We make our own rules," Jacob said. "This is the frontier, Eleanor. The law is whatever we say it is out here. As far as I'm concerned, you are my wife in every way that matters. If you want to make it legal eventually, we will figure that out. But right now, in this moment, you are mine and I am yours. And that is all that counts." "Your wife," Eleanor tested the words, smiling. "I like the sound of that. Eleanor Thornhill." "It suits you." Jacob pressed a kiss to her hair. "Though you will always be Eleanor Rose Briggs to me, the woman brave enough to claim her own name back." They talked late into the night, making plans for the future. Eleanor wanted to expand the garden, maybe start raising chickens. Jacob talked about building an addition to the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and maybe a workshop. They discussed the practical realities of living together, sharing chores and space and life, and every word felt like laying a foundation for something permanent and good. "I want children someday," Eleanor said quietly. "Is that something you would want?" Jacob was silent for a moment, thinking of his sister who never got to grow up, of the family he had lost. "Yes," he said finally. "I would like that very much. A second chance at family." "A second chance at everything," Eleanor agreed, snuggling closer. "For both of us." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Jacob had forgotten what it was like to share life with another person, to wake up beside someone warm and real, to have another voice besides his own echoing through the cabin. Eleanor threw herself into making the place a home, adding small touches that transformed the space from a bachelor's functional shelter into something welcoming and beautiful. She sewed curtains from cloth Jacob had never bothered to use, planted late-season herbs in pots by the door, and somehow convinced him to build her a proper kitchen counter with storage underneath. She sang while she worked, her voice clear and true, filling the cabin with music for the first time in 2 decades. Jacob, for his part, found himself doing things he never would have bothered with before. He built Eleanor a proper bathing tub and installed it in a curtained corner of the cabin. He crafted a rocking chair from oak, his hands remembering skills his father had taught him in the blacksmith shop years ago. He even let Eleanor talk him into going to Silver Creek for supplies more often than was strictly necessary, because she wanted to meet people and start building connections with the community. The people of Silver Creek were curious about the mountain man who suddenly had a woman living with him, but Eleanor handled their questions with grace and a carefully edited version of the truth. She was a widow, she told them, who had been traveling west when circumstances forced her to seek shelter with Mr. Thornhill. They had discovered they suited each other well, and she had decided to stay. It was close enough to the truth to satisfy most people, and those who wanted more details quickly learned that Eleanor had a spine of steel beneath her friendly exterior. By the time winter arrived, dumping 3 feet of snow on the mountains and making travel nearly impossible, Jacob and Eleanor had settled into their life together, as if they had been doing it for years instead of months. They spent the long, cold evenings by the fire, reading aloud from Jacob's small collection of books, playing card games, talking about everything and nothing. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked one night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside. "Leaving everything behind, ending up here with me." "Not for a single moment," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I'm happier here, snowed in on a mountain with you, than I ever was in any town or city. This is home, Jake. You are home." "You are my home too," Jacob said, pulling her close. "My heart, my hope, my future. Everything I thought I had lost, you gave back to me." Eleanor kissed him softly. "We gave it back to each other." Winter gave way to spring, and with the thaw came news from Silver Creek. Raymond Sutton had been arrested in Denver for assaulting another woman, a saloon girl who had refused his advances. He was sitting in jail awaiting trial, and the circumstances of his arrest made it clear he would be locked up for a good long while. "It is over," Eleanor said, reading the letter from the Silver Creek marshal. "He cannot hurt anyone else now." "Good." Jacob wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "How do you feel?" Relieved. Free. Eleanor leaned back into him. And grateful that I do not have to testify or face him again. The universe delivered justice without requiring anything from me. The universe, and one very brave saloon girl, Jacob said. It takes courage to stand up to a man like Raymond. I know. Eleanor turned in his arms, her expression thoughtful. I have been thinking, Jake, about that woman and all the other women like her who have nowhere to run when men hurt them, about how lucky I was to stumble onto your porch instead of ending up dead in a ditch somewhere. Where is this going? Jacob asked, though he had a feeling he knew. I want to do something. Build something that helps people like me. Eleanor's eyes were bright with determination. What if we built a way station, a place where women running from bad situations could stop and rest and figure out their next move? We have the space, and I know these mountains. We could offer real help. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, considering. It would mean more people, more intrusions on the solitude he had guarded so carefully for 2 decades. But it would also mean purpose, legacy, a way to turn his and Eleanor's pain into something that helped others. Yes, he said finally, let us build that, together. Eleanor's smile was radiant. Together, she agreed. They spent the summer building an addition to the cabin, a separate structure connected by a covered walkway that could house up to 4 people comfortably. Jacob did most of the heavy construction while Eleanor worked on the details, making the space welcoming and functional. By early autumn, they were ready to quietly spread the word through Silver Creek and the surrounding settlements that there was a safe place in the mountains for women who needed help. The first guest arrived in late October, a young woman not much older than Eleanor had been when she married Raymond. She had a black eye and a broken wrist, and she sobbed with relief when Eleanor opened the door. You are safe now, Eleanor said gently, guiding her inside. You are safe, and we will help you figure out what comes next. Over the next year, they helped 6 women escape dangerous situations. Some stayed only a few days before moving on to new lives elsewhere. Others stayed weeks or months, healing both physically and emotionally before taking their next steps. Eleanor was a natural at the work, combining practical help with genuine compassion, and Jacob found that he did not mind the intrusions on his solitude nearly as much as he had expected. You are good at this, he told Eleanor one evening as they watched their current guest, a widow named Martha, laughing with her young daughter by the fire. You have found your calling. We found our calling, Eleanor corrected. I could not do this without you, Jake. You provide the safety and stability that makes this possible. And you provide the heart. Jacob pulled her close, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against him. I love you, Eleanor Thornhill. She had started using his name months ago, and though they had not made it legal yet, it felt right. They were married in every way that mattered, bound by love and commitment and the life they were building together. I love you too, Eleanor said, tilting her face up for a kiss. My mountain man who turned out to have the gentlest heart I have ever known. 2 years after Eleanor had appeared on Jacob's porch cooking bacon like she belonged there, they finally made it official. A traveling preacher passed through Silver Creek, and Jacob and Eleanor stood before him and a small gathering of townspeople and made vows they had already been living for years. I, Eleanor Rose Briggs, take you, Jacob Thomas Thornhill, to be my husband, Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong. You took me in when I was lost and gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You taught me what love really means, and I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you the same kindness and devotion you have shown me. I, Jacob Thomas Thornhill, take you, Eleanor Rose Briggs, to be my wife, Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. You walked into my life and reminded me that I was still alive. You gave me a reason to hope again, and I promise to protect and cherish you for all the days I have left. There was not a dry eye in the small church when they kissed, sealing vows that had been made in their hearts long before they were spoken aloud. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, and as Jacob danced with his new wife under the stars, he thought about how much his life had changed in such a short time. 2 years ago, he had been alone, convinced he would die on his mountain with no one to mourn him. Now he had a wife he adored, a purpose that gave his life meaning, and a future bright with possibility. What are you thinking about? Eleanor asked, her head resting on his chest as they swayed to the music. How you saved me, Jacob said honestly. How I thought I was saving you, but really, you saved me." "We saved each other," Eleanor said, the same words she had spoken that first week. "That is what love does, Jake. It saves us from ourselves." A year later, Eleanor gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Thomas Jacob after both their fathers. Jacob held his son with shaking hands, marveling at the tiny, perfect features, the strong grip of small fingers around his thumb. He is beautiful," Jacob whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect." "He is ours," Eleanor said, exhausted but glowing with joy. "Our family, Jake, the one we chose." Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Catherine Rose, after both their mothers. The cabin grew crowded and loud with the sounds of children, and Jacob had never been happier. He had found his second chance, his redemption, his reason for living. The way station continued to operate, with Eleanor and Jacob helping dozens of women over the years. Some became friends, staying in touch long after they moved on. Others disappeared into their new lives, but Eleanor knew she had made a difference, had given them the same chance at freedom and safety that Jacob had given her. "Do you ever think about that first morning?" Eleanor asked one evening when the children were in bed, and they sat together on the porch watching the stars. "When you came home and found me cooking bacon?" "Every day," Jacob said, his arm around her shoulders. "Best moment of my life, though I did not know it then." "I was so scared," Eleanor admitted, "terrified you would shoot me or turn me over to Raymond. But then I saw your eyes, and I knew somehow that you would help me." "I saw a fighter," Jacob said. "Someone who refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. How could I not help you?" "We were both fighters," Eleanor said. "Both survivors who had lost our way. We just needed each other to remember how to live again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the mountain night peaceful around them. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "I'm pregnant," she said softly. Jacob went still, then turned to her with wonder written across his face. "Again? Already?" "Again," Eleanor laughed at his expression. "Apparently we are very good at making babies, Mr. Thornhill." "Apparently so, Mrs. Thornhill." Jacob pulled her into his lap, cradling her carefully. "How do you feel about that?" "Happy, excited, a little tired at the thought of starting over with an infant." Eleanor snuggled into his chest, "But mostly grateful. Grateful for this life, for you, for the family we have built. I never thought I would have this, Jake. Never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything good in this world," Jacob said fiercely. "Everything, Eleanor. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." Their third child, a boy they named Samuel, was born in the spring of 1882. The way station was temporarily closed during Eleanor's recovery, but she was back at work within weeks, unable to stay away from the women who needed her help. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Catherine was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and demanding her father teach her to hunt. Samuel was the peacemaker, gentle and observant, who could charm anyone with his smile. Jacob taught his children everything he knew about the mountains, about tracking and survival and respect for the land. Eleanor taught them reading and arithmetic, music and kindness, and the importance of helping those in need. Together, they raised their family in the cabin that had once housed only one lonely man, and it was never quiet and never empty and absolutely perfect. "I have been thinking," Eleanor said one evening when the children were teenagers and the way station was busier than ever, "about legacy, about what we leave behind when we are gone." "That's a cheerful thought," Jacob said dryly, but he was listening. "I am serious, Jake. We have built something important here, something that has helped so many people. I want to make sure it continues after we are gone." Eleanor took his hand. "I want to deed the land to the territorial government with the stipulation that it must always be used as a refuge for women in need. Make it official, protected." Jacob considered this. He had never cared much for the government or official declarations, but he could see the wisdom in Eleanor's suggestion. "You want to make sure our work outlives us." "Exactly. And I want our children to understand that this is bigger than just our family. This is about creating a better world, one safe place at a time." "Then that is what we will do," Jacob agreed. "We will go to Denver, file the paperwork, make it legal and permanent, the Thornhill way station in perpetuity." Eleanor beamed. "I love you, Jacob Thornhill." "I love you too, Eleanor Thornhill. More than I ever thought possible." They made the trip to Denver the following month, accompanied by Thomas, who was 18 and interested in the legal aspects of the work. The paperwork was filed, the land protected, and the way station officially recognized as a refuge. It was a moment of pride for all of them, seeing something they had built acknowledged and preserved. On the way home, Thomas asked the question Jacob had been expecting for years. "How did you and Ma really meet? I know the story you tell people, but I want the truth." Jacob glanced at Eleanor, who nodded. Their son was an adult now, old enough to understand the complexities of their story. "Your mother was running from a man who hurt her," Jacob said honestly. "She ended up on my porch, cooking breakfast like she belonged there, and I could not find it in myself to send her away. We fell in love, and the rest you know." "Was she married to him? The man she was running from?" Thomas asked, his lawyer's mind already working through the implications. "Yes," Eleanor said. "And before you ask, the marriage was dissolved years ago. Raymond died in prison in 1880. I am legally free and have been for some time." Thomas nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me the truth. It does not change anything, you know. You are still my parents, still the best people I know." "We are not perfect," Jacob said. "We made choices some would judge harshly." "You survived," Thomas said. "You found each other and built something beautiful from pain and loss. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to be proud of." Eleanor reached across the wagon seat to squeeze her son's hand. "You are going to be an excellent lawyer, Thomas Thornhill." "I learned from the best," Thomas said with a smile. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Catherine married a surveyor and moved to California, writing long letters about the ocean and the redwood trees. Samuel followed his older brother into law, and together they opened a practice in Denver that specialized in helping women gain divorces and legal protection from abusive spouses. "They are carrying on your work," Jacob said to Eleanor as they read Samuel's latest letter describing a case he had won. "Just in a different way." "Our work," Eleanor corrected, as she always did. "None of this would exist without you, Jake. And none of it would exist without you walking onto my porch that morning," Jacob countered. They were in their 60s now, still healthy and active, but feeling their age more with each passing year. The way station was being run primarily by a younger couple they had trained, though Eleanor still advised and Jacob still made sure the place was secure and well maintained. "I have been thinking," Jacob said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains he had called home for over 40 years. "About the first 20 years I spent up here alone. What a waste they were." "They were not a waste," Eleanor said firmly. "They prepared you for me. If we had met when you were younger, grieving and angry, it would not have worked. We needed to become who we were supposed to be before we could find each other." "Maybe," Jacob pulled her closer. "But I still regret all those years without you." "Then let us make the most of the years we have left," Eleanor said. "No more regrets, Jake, only gratitude for what we have been given." "Gratitude," Jacob agreed, pressing a kiss to her silver-streaked hair. "For you, for our children, for the life we built together. I am grateful for all of it." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and good. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to their love story, guardians of the refuge they had created. Inside the cabin, candles flickered to life as the young couple managing the way station prepared dinner. Two women were currently staying with them, both working through their own journeys from pain to healing. The work continued, the legacy grew, and Jacob and Eleanor watched it all with quiet satisfaction. "No regrets," Eleanor said again, her hand finding Jacob's in the darkness. "No regrets," Jacob echoed, "only love." And that, they both knew, was more than enough. It was everything. The story of the mountain man who lived alone for 20 years and the woman who appeared on his porch cooking bacon like she belonged became legend in the territories. Parents told it to their daughters as proof that safety and love existed even in the hardest places. Women fleeing desperate situations sought out the Thornhill way station, knowing they would find help without judgment. And in the cabin on the mountain, Jacob and Eleanor Thornhill lived out their days surrounded by love and purpose, proof that it is never too late to find your way home. When Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, Jacob held her hand and whispered all the things he had told her every day of their life together. That she was his heart, his hope, his reason for living. That finding her had saved him in every way a person could be saved. That he would love her beyond death and into whatever came after. He lived another 5 years without her, continuing to oversee the way station and spending time with his children and growing number of grandchildren. But everyone could see that part of him had gone with Eleanor, that he was waiting for the day he could join her. When that day came, on a clear autumn morning, much like the one when he had first seen Eleanor on his porch, Jacob died quietly in his sleep, a peaceful smile on his weathered face. His children buried him beside Eleanor on the mountain they had loved, under a stone that read simply, Jacob and Eleanor Thornhill, who found each other and saved themselves. The way station continued for generations, helping countless women find safety and new beginnings. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist rolled through the pines, people swore they could smell bacon cooking and hear the faint sound of laughter, as if Jacob and Eleanor were still there, still cooking breakfast together, still proving that love could bloom even in the loneliest places. Their love story became a legend, not because it was easy or perfect, but because it was real, because they had both been broken and lost, and they had found wholeness in each other, because they had taken their pain and transformed it into purpose, their loneliness into legacy. The mountains remembered them, as mountains remember all great loves. And in the cabin that Jacob built and Eleanor made into a home, their presence lingered like a blessing, a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected encounters, and that it is never too late to open your heart to the possibility of love. Their children and grandchildren carried on their work, expanding the way station into a network of safe houses across the territories. The Thornhill name became synonymous with refuge and hope, and every woman who passed through their doors heard the story of how it all began. About the mountain man who thought he wanted to be alone and the desperate woman who proved him wrong. About bacon cooking on a porch and a heart thawing after 20 frozen years. About 2 wounded souls who found in each other exactly what they needed to heal. And so the story lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the transformative power of love and the courage it takes to let someone into your carefully guarded heart. Jacob and Eleanor's love story was not just about romance. It was about redemption, second chances, and the profound truth that we are never so lost that we cannot be found by the right person at the right time. In the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the way station, though it helped thousands. Not their children, though they were successful and good. Their greatest legacy was the proof that love could heal the deepest wounds, that solitude was not the same as peace, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was open your door to a stranger cooking breakfast on your porch like they belonged there. Because as it turned out, Eleanor had belonged there, and Jacob, after 20 years of thinking he needed no one, had belonged with her. They had belonged together, 2 halves of a whole that had been waiting to find each other across time and circumstance and the vast wilderness of the Colorado mountains. Their story ended as all great love stories must, with death and separation. But it also ended with joy and fulfillment, with children and grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward into the world. It ended with a legacy that outlived them both, helping people they would never meet, changing lives they would never know about. Thomas Thornhill, in his 70s and a respected territorial judge, stood at his parents' grave on the 50th anniversary of the way station's founding. Around him gathered dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Jacob and Eleanor's work, women who had found refuge and the courage to start over, children who had been born free because their mothers escaped, families that existed because 2 people had chosen love over fear. They taught us that strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to act in spite of it, Thomas said to the assembled crowd. My father was afraid of losing people he loved, so he lived alone for 20 years. My mother was afraid of dying at her husband's hands, so she ran into the mountains. They were both terrified when they met, but they chose each other anyway. They chose hope over fear, connection over isolation, love over safety. And in doing so, they showed us all how to be brave. As the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their love story, the gathered crowd sang a hymn Eleanor had loved. The sound carried on the wind through the pines, past the way station where even now a young woman was finding safety, up to the cabin where Jacob had once lived alone and where he and Eleanor had built their life together. And if the mountains could speak, they would tell of the mountain man who hunted alone for 20 years, until he found her cooking on his porch like she belonged. They would tell of the love that grew from that unexpected meeting, strong and true and lasting. They would tell of the legacy built from pain transformed into purpose, of two broken people who became whole together. But mountains do not speak, they simply stand, eternal and watching, guardians of the stories that unfold in their shadows. And among all the stories those Colorado mountains held, the story of Jacob and Eleanor Thornhill remained one of the finest, a testament to love's power to heal, to hope's refusal to die, and to the beautiful truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected encounters. The mountain man had hunted alone for 20 years, but then he found her, cooking on his porch like she belonged, and in finding her, he found himself. He found home. He found love. He found everything he had been searching for without even knowing he was searching. That was the real magic of their story. Not that they found each other, though that was miraculous enough, but that in finding each other, they found the courage to become more than they had been alone. They became a family, a refuge, a hope. They became legendary, and their love, born on a mountain porch over the scent of frying bacon, became eternal.